This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Look at the glasses. Check the time. It's time for Legal AF After Dark. No one will ever accuse Jack Smith, special counsel, of being a dull boy. What has he been up to? He can walk. He can chew gum. He can get a superseding indictment behind our backs at the grand jury in the District of Columbia against Donald Trump, and he can file an 11th Circuit brief all at the same time. We talk about all of that on Legal AF. Take a listen. Let's jump right in. Jack Smith can walk and chew gum at the same time and indict and file 11th Circuit briefs at the same time. Talk about, I've done some hot takes, you've done some hot takes. Talk about it from your perspective. Why don't you explain to the audience, what is a superseding indictment? What is the meaning of it coming out of an existing grand jury that's been kicking around since apparently 2023? Why did Jack Smith decide to do that rather than, or did he have to do that in order to salvage his indictment? And what does it mean for the future? Arraignment, motion practice, trial in this case. Why don't you sort of kick it off, and then I'll do some commentary when you're done.
Sure. So let's start with what is an indictment. An indictment is the charging document or charging instrument that tells you what the charges are against you. And you get the indictment by presenting evidence to a grand jury, and the grand jury votes on whether or not there is probable cause to believe that a crime occurred. It's a lower standard. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. And in the federal system, your evidence doesn't have to be live witnesses where they come in and they testify and tell you from their firsthand knowledge what happened, like you have to in New York, for example. You could have an FBI agent come in and testify and talk about their summary of the case. I mean, that's sometimes what prosecutors do. So it is quite easy to get an indictment if you have the evidence. You go in, you swear to tell the truth, and you have to under oath tell them exactly what the case is about, but it's not that complicated to do federally. And prosecutors often supersede. Now, a superseding indictment just means it's amended or it's changed. And if you're going to add any charges, add any words, add any defendants, if you're going to add anything to an indictment, you have to supersede. If Jack Smith were going to just, for example, take out certain things from the indictment, he would not have had to supersede. He could have just literally crossed them out and dropped it off of the indictment. So that the fact that he superseded and didn't just cross things out was clue number one that the indictment has changed pretty dramatically. In light of the July immunity ruling that the Supreme Court handed down, saying that the president or any president essentially is immune for official acts. And again, because he could be just immune from official acts, he could have just gone through and X'd things out, but he made a lot of changes. And the changes were both substantive and stylistic, and was very interesting because he made sure in this new superseding indictment to make this all about Donald Trump in his personal capacity or his as a candidate, so not as president. And so a lot came out, including everything related to the Department of Justice, like Jeffrey Clark and his attempt to install Jeffrey Clark in the 11th hour after the election, after he'd already lost, but before inauguration, to try and continue this bogus election interference claim with all these ridiculous investigations into quote unquote fraud, right? That was, he's like an environmental lawyer at the Department of Justice that he was going to super elevate to the role of acting attorney general in these waning days of his administration, which is just suspect in and of itself. And all of that has come out, and it leads an open question because Jeffrey Clark was one of the co-conspirators. I think it was co-conspirator number 4, and that's just been removed. The other co-conspirators, there were 6 total, were still there. When we saw there was a superseding indictment, one of my questions that I had to myself was, are the co-conspirators going to be are they going to be indicted? They're unindicted co-conspirators. Are we going to see a 7-defendant or 6-defendant indictment? But no, Jack Smith kept it only Donald Trump, but he kept the same 4 charges. He didn't change that, the same exact 4 charges. It's just about what he's going to prove and what evidence came in. And the indictment takes you through, you go through it all, and it's very much about candidate Trump and citizen Trump and Trump in his personal capacity. And, but the most interesting thing that he kept in there was all the references to Mike Pence. Because that could have been something that Jack Smith said, that's dicey, because the Supreme Court said, basically your title doesn't give you immunity. It's what function you're in that gives you immunity. And the vice president could be one of those people that goes either way. Because in addition to being part of the executive branch and being Donald Trump's vice president at the time, he was also his running mate, right? He also was candidate vice president for the next election for that election, for the next administration. And the other thing he was, as all vice presidents are, he's the ceremonial certifier of the election results in his capacity as president of the Senate. So he's essentially part of the legislative branch when he does that. And so Jack Smith kept all of that in, but all of the Department of Justice stuff is out, and the indictment is pared down. It's about 9 or 10 pages shorter, and he really made it so that there's very little that is still on the table for Judge Chutkan to have to apply the new law to these facts. And I still think she might hold an evidentiary hearing with respect to certain evidence in here. There's some evidence that you don't have to, that's clearly, plainly personal, private candidate Trump stuff. And a lot of that had to do with the fake slates of electors, et cetera, in the states. And so much of that stayed in there. But this Mike Pence stuff, I think, is something that she might want to hold a hearing, as well as some of the evidence, some of the evidentiary stuff that Jack Smith had in here. Like, for example, the presidential Twitter account that Jack Smith added language to clarify that sometimes he used it in his presidential capacity, but sometimes in his personal capacity. So those are the types of things that Judge Chutkan will have to determine and potentially hold a mini hearing, if you will, or a mini trial with respect to this evidence at a hearing before the election, which might happen. But what has to happen first before that is you have to be arraigned. You have to be arraigned on this superseding indictment. Every time there's a new charging instrument, the first thing that has to happen is an arraignment, and nothing can happen until he is arraigned. And knowing that, Jack Smith said, we'll waive Mr. Trump's, or defendant Trump's, will waive his appearance if the judge wants and if the defendant wants, because there's so much logistics and so much that goes into bringing him there and having him have to come to court, et cetera, and to just not delay things. But I agree with you, Popok. It's very clear that when Jack Smith asked for some more time, it's because he was going into the grand jury and presenting this superseder. And, and it was secret, because all grand jury proceedings are, by their nature, are secret. You never know what's going on there. So he's been busy at work, and I think we have a pretty substantial charging instrument here that's going to pass muster, constitutional muster.
Let me do the end, and then I'll go to the beginning of your commentary on the end. The arraignment. If I was a betting man, which I am, he's showing up for the arraignment. This is like telling an arsonist to stay away from a fire. He uses these opportunities, and he's running out of these opportunities to in order to reinforce his whole lawfare, weaponization, election interference. I mean, everybody has seen it. If not, we've reported on it here on the MeidasTouch network. All of his insane, untethered to reality social media postings about, election interference again, weaponization again. He's not going to give up this opportunity. He's going to be like, nope, I want to go to the arraignment because I want to stand in front of those bicycle racks in front of the courthouse again, like I did in New York. And I want to have my press conference, and I want to have all the cameras on me. And he's running out of opportunities where that happens. They complain about Kamala Harris not giving an interview, which he's giving, and it's going to be reported tomorrow by CNN. Which I thought, just to digress for a moment, let's give her a break, okay? 6 weeks ago or whatever it was, she didn't know she was going to be running for president. So in that short amount of time, she had to recalibrate, get her entire staff refocused, hire new people, take over the social media platform, the campaign platform, get her delegates in shape, get actually nominated, hold a convention, and then do battleground states while she's picked the vice president and be vice president while she's doing that. Okay. She may not have had time to sit down for a 20-minute Q&A. It's not because she's an idiot or she was avoiding it or because she wants to use notes or anything else. It's because she was doing some other really important things in a very compressed period. So even the Democrats are hand-wringing about, why isn't she doing a press conference? All right, relax. I think she'd have you wouldn't want to hear from her if she hadn't already been nominated. She's now the vice president, the presidential candidate. Donald Trump, by contrast, is going to come to that arraignment, and it's going to be maybe before the debate at the rate we're going. It looks like it's going to be the sentencing of Donald Trump a week or so after the debate on the 10th of September, and this arraignment maybe before. What I liked about this gangster act by Jack Smith is, and it doesn't, to answer the question, I think this is what you were alluding to, it doesn't eliminate the hearing. The trial judge has been instructed by the Supreme Court and her bosses that she is to take whatever indictment is in front of her. Yes, it was traveled under an original indictment, but now take the superseding indictment and test it, pressure test it, and make sure that the immunity decision-making about evidence, about official conduct, stretched to its outer boundaries, constitutional core, presidential conduct, and private conduct has all been properly made out. Now, I like the fact that rather than just blue penciling the indictment, he decided, you know what, while we're in there, let's beef up all the references to the private attorneys and the private ellipse campaign speech and the lack of a role for the president in the electoral count process while we're at it. And let's also beef up the fake elector certificates and Donald Trump's role in it, because that is completely a way to salvage the 18 USC 1512 counts for obstruction of an official proceeding. That was the blueprint left to them, the path left to them by the United States Supreme Court 6-3 MAGA right-wing decision. So, they were diligently on their own running this through the filter of it. But now Judge Chutkan has to do her job. I'm not sure about the evidentiary hearing. First of all, as I said in a prior hot take here on the network, it's been reported that, and he's right, Jack Smith doesn't want to showcase his trial strategy, his evidence. He doesn't want to, the last thing you want to do is tip off an outmatched and stretched too thin Donald Trump legal team. I don't want to give them a show of what I've done mini and summary trials in front of juries. You don't want to do it. If you don't have to, you don't want to do it. And I think this new indictment, superseding, has to rise and fall on its own merits. Can't be supplemented by other pieces of evidence from the secret grand jury. It either does or does not state criminal actions against Donald Trump for the 4 counts based on the elements that have to be alleged from this, or if it has deficiencies because of the way the grand jury handled it, or otherwise, that's for the judge to decide. Ultimately, I don't think she has to hear from anyone. Mike Pence doesn't have to come in and tell a story in order for her to understand. Just like any other indictment has to rise and fall on its own merits. So I think they're going to push for briefing, no evidentiary hearing. Trump wants delay, so he's going to push for who knows what. Yes, I want to hear a preview of what the prosecutors are going to put on, and we're going to hear from that. And then you have the question of what this does to the trial. And my argument, if I was Jack Smith, even though I know you framed it as this is a substantial rewrite back in old Hollywood when they used to rewrite, the script, rewrite of the original indictment. And that is one way to argue it. And I think Trump's going to argue it's a rewrite. I think another way to argue it is that the essential elements, except for Jeff Clark being removed and a couple of window dressings about private counsel and a little more beef up on the fraudulent false elector certificates, it's essentially the same. It still tells the same story about battleground states, what Trump, Giuliani, and others did in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Arizona. Still telling the same story about Giuliani pressuring Rusty Bowers, the Speaker of the House in Arizona, the fake legislative hearings with the dye dripping Giuliani in Pennsylvania. Oh, they left that part out. It still tells the essential same story and same 4 counts, same co-conspirators, except one has been removed. And then the other aspect of it I wanted to hit on here get your view, Karen, is that the fact that we now have reporting that the grand jury, we now know more about the grand jury. The grand jury was not recently convened in 2024 in order to re-indict Donald Trump. They went back to an existing grand jury that's been kicking around since 23, a grand jury whose number is 23-8, who sits in D.C. and has been doing lots of things over the last year and a half, including indicting Gen 6 insurrectionists. It's the same grand jury, apparently, that indicted the carjacker for Justice Sotomayor. And, you know, I could just see Jack Smith sitting around a table like, we're going to re-indict. Where should we go? Should we do a And somebody said, well, we got a 23-8 grand jury sitting around, and they've been doing Gen 6 stuff. Why don't we go into them? Great idea. When do they meet? Let's bring them. Let's do it. And one of my takes on this is I am not sure that Giuliani, Boris Epstein, Ken Chesborough, and John Eastman, who are still listed as unindicted co-conspirators, one through whatever, I'm not sure they're out of the woods yet.